unfiltered discussions, unexpected guests. No topic is off limits, from sex and relationships to the human condition, personal anxieties, and so much more. The only talk show of its kind in the world. This is The Last Show with David Cooper.
Hello and welcome. Happy Tuesday. I think that's how you say that word. Update from my little black cat, Tomato. He threw up at 4 a.m. and woke me up. We got a lot to cover tonight in 10 minutes time. The science behind the ick. That's right. That feeling you get when you're in a relationship and everything all of a sudden seems icky about that person. Then, what really happens to you when someone takes credit for your work at work? And how damaging can that be to the whole company that you work at? That'll be in about 30 minutes time. Tonight's show is going to be full of, well, something. Let's jump in.
Want to be part of The Last Show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. Advice for your tomorrow self from yesterday, or maybe from today for tomorrow. If you're confused, you're not alone. This is what happens on The Last Show with David Cooper.
It's advice for your tomorrow self today. The most straightforward, easiest to understand thing ever done on all of radio. The premise of our little bit here is as follows. You call in the show. The number is 1-888-505-6644. You record a voicemail. It's your past self. Even though if you record the voicemail today, it'll be your today's self, but it's your past self in the future. What's hard to understand about that? And your past self in the future, which is today, records a message for your future self, which is tomorrow, from the perspective of today, with advice for your future self today. I mean, you just call the number and you give yourself some advice. Then we call you back, which we're about to do with a listener. And we check in with your past self, with your today's self, which is your future self from the past, and we see if you followed the advice. It's advice for your tomorrow self from yesterday, today. Not confusing at all. Really, you just record something and then see if you did it later. All right, here's a voicemail we got from Eric in Guelph in Canada today. I mean, yesterday. We got it yesterday. I'm so confused.
Hey David, Eric in Guelph here, and I need to give some advice to my tomorrow self from yesterday to today. So basically, I've gotten in the bad habit of feeding the backyard critters. At first, I was just throwing old produce into the naturalized area behind my house, but over time, it's gone a bit out of hand, to the point where I may have found myself sharing a fillet of fish with an opossum the other day. This is also causing issues in my relationship. As my wife is concerned, I'll end up attracting unwanted creatures like rodents and coyotes, or that I'll end up catching rabies from the opossum, which is insane because everyone knows it's rare for marsupials to carry rabies. But irregardless, it needs to end. So my advice to my tomorrow self yesterday is to stop feeding the wild animals. Hopefully I can follow my own advice. Thanks. Bye.
All right, that was yesterday. We are now today. We're going to check in with Eric from Guelph's yesterday's self today, which is now, but it's also tomorrow from yesterday's perspective. I'll stop talking. We have Eric in Guelph, the man, the legend, the critter-feeding critter feeder. How's that for an introduction? Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, David.
Why do you feed the critters in your backyard?
I think in part, like, it was just because, if I did an apple, throw the core over the fence, something like that. And I viewed it as composting. And also I like eating carrots with the long green stalks because I'll pretend I'm Bugs Bunny when I do it. So same thing. And I kind of like the idea of rabbits getting to eat carrots because I doubt that the wild rabbits actually get to eat carrots all that often. I was kind of reflecting after I called, and I remember seeing a squirrel. Well, there was a couple squirrels chasing each other through the trees, fighting over a piece of bacon. And it kind of set something off inside me, like animals eating weird things.
Yeah, when animals that aren't supposed to eat animals, it's always disconcerting. Like when I see pigeons eating meat, like hot dogs, I'm like, no, you're not supposed to do that.
Exactly. So I think there is an underlying part of me that does take satisfaction in that. Like there's a raccoon in our neighborhood who has eaten horse meat.
How do you know that?
I gave it to him.
Oh. Okay, I see.
Yeah. It was ethically sourced.
Where I live, composting goes to rats and cockroaches, so it's also helping the environment. And your wife doesn't like these critters. She's scared of rabies.
Yeah.
Is she scared you're going to get it? Your pets are going to get it? What's going on here?
A combination. So she, for one, her main concern was, it was going to attract, things that aren't cute, like rats and mice. And that is fair. And then we actually have quite a few coyotes around here. So her concern is you're going to bring the coyotes around. They're going to eat our cats, who are, I would say, are part-time outdoor. They like to go in the backyard once in a while. So that is definitely part of it. I also think she's a little jealous of the opossum.
You and the opossum have a romantic...
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, no, not romantic. But, the way I talk about the opossum, she's like, why can't you talk about me that way? And it's,
That's funny. I was fawning over my kitty last night, being like, I love you, and kissing him because I'm weird like that. And my girlfriend was Miranda. She was like very upset about this. She's like, why don't you cuddle and love? Anyway, me is what she said. Anyway, I'm sort of in two sentences at the same time right here. Did you follow your advice? Could you go one day, 24 hours without feeding the critters in your backyard?
Yes, but it was tough. So I was confident that I wouldn't do anything until Oprah came back around. And that's what I named the opossum. So Oprah was standing in my backyard looking at me with her beautiful beady eyes. And I was eating some kielbasa. So I was going to go and sneak her some. And my wife said, what are you doing? She looked outside, saw Oprah. We get into an argument. And she says, basically along the lines of like, you love that thing more than your own family, which is a lie, but it kind of stuck with me. So I actually, based on one of your other advice for your Tomorrow Self Yesterday segments, you recommended a haiku.
Oh, yeah.
I wrote a haiku to tell myself.
For Oprah?
Yeah. And forgive me, I got to do the little syllable thing while I say it to make sure I don't mess it up.
It's hard. Yeah, it's 575, just to give you a recap on that one.
575. So I was impressed that I was able to pull it off so quickly, but I said, don't feed kielbasa to the opossum outside. He is not your son.
That's not even... It's not even close. Don't feed the kielbasa.
No, don't feed kielbasa. That's 5.
Don't feed kielbasa to the opossum outdoors. Oh, that is 7.
Outside or outdoors?
Yeah, outside. Okay. And what was the last one?
He is not your son.
He is not yours. Wow. Okay. Sorry. I apologize.
It's okay. Just don't ever question me again.
But when we started talking here, you were talking about not feeding meat to animals that shouldn't eat meat. And then kielbasa to an opossum.
I call it both. I don't know what it is. Kielbasa. But I think opossums eat meat.
Do they? Are they carnivorous? They're so weird looking, man.
Oh, I know. Yeah, they're really weird. And I think that's why I'm so fascinated, because to actually have one coming around is, to me, it's like a majestic animal, even though it just looks like a scary rat. But yeah, they eat bugs and grubs and stuff like that.
Bugs and grubs.
It's not like too far off, but again, it's not right that I'm feeding the wild animals. So I said my little poem to myself, said, sorry, Oprah, and I'm standing firm with that. I think what I'm going to do is start a compost pile instead, so that I can still let all my organics rot in my backyard instead of over the fence.
Gun to your head, a life with Oprah, the opossum, or a happily ever after life with your wife and family.
That's a tough one, David, but I'm going to go with my family.
Well, Eric, thank you for being here. Thank you for following your advice for your tomorrow self. You and Oprah sound like you're going to be very happy together.
Thank you. I mean, I think we're broken up now, but it's probably for the best.
It's probably for the best. If you want to give yourself advice for your tomorrow self from yesterday today, just call 1-888-505-6644. That's 1-888-505-6644. If we don't pick up, leave a voicemail, record that advice, leave your number, and we will call you back to follow up tomorrow. Well, it'll be today when we call you back, but tomorrow from yesterday. After the break, a scientific investigation into the ick, that horrible feeling you get when you're dating someone, they do something weird or gross, and you're turned off. Will this interview give you the ick from this show? I hope not, but find out next. I am David Cooper, and this is The Last Show. It's the beginning of The Last Show.
we solve world problems with radio jingles and bad advice. This is The Last Show with David Cooper.
Has it happened to you where you're dating someone and they sneeze in a weird way and you can't get the picture of the sneeze out of your head? It's called the ick. And when it happens to you, it can turn you off from a romantic partner. Well, we're going to discuss it from an academic angle. Someone here has studied the ick with like a paper and everything. Her name is Chloe Yin. She's done work in organizational psychology at the University of Southern California. Chloe, welcome in.
Hi, how are you, David?
I am doing well. Thank you for asking. This is such a fun topic. And when we saw that there was an academic paper on it, I just had to bite. First of all, how do you go about defining what the ick is in a context like that?
Honestly, the ick is just think of it as like an involuntary feeling. You suddenly get it. There's like no control whatsoever. And immediately from maybe you were just so attracted to someone that you just met, but immediately all of those feelings, everything that was a turn on just disappeared. And you're like, oh my gosh, please get me away from this person as soon as possible. And that's basically what it is. And it could be something really small. And sometimes you might think back to it and you're like, wait, this isn't even a big red flag or anything like that at all. How come that just made me suddenly feel such a disgust in that type of way? And then you might be even ashamed to tell it to someone else, but it happened. And that's exactly what it is.
It can be so small. It could be a gesture. It could be like a figure of speech they used. I dated someone once who used the word bummer one too many times, and it started annoying me. I once dated someone. She had really bad breath one day, and then every time we kissed afterward, even though she didn't have bad breath, the ghost of the bad breath haunted me. We broke up for other reasons. I'm not that superficial, but it's a real thing, and I think it's happened to a lot of people. Why does it feel so sudden and so intense? Where does it come from when we're with someone and one little thing, or maybe big thing, turns us off so much?
Well, from the research, so that was the same question that I think like our team had, and Dr. Collison and I, as we were doing the research for it, we were trying to figure out, that was the question, right? Like how come? How does that happen? It's so strange. And I think if you look at research, like academically going backwards in the history of time, it could come from a protective mechanism, when human being, like what, if you go back all the way to the Neolithic ages or whatever like that, you might think back and you're like, oh, there was a lot of disease. People died really early. And so it could come from a protective mechanism, that bad breath that you were talking about. It could really just be like, oh my gosh, this person has bad breath. What if they have a disease and then they die on me? And then I won't be able to have children and continue the species. And so it could stem from that. So that's what research talked about, that this involuntary feeling could come from kind of like what's ingrained.
Primitive stuff, the sort of opposite of positive stuff like pheromones, or maybe you're with a partner and you like the smell of their sweat or something gross like that really attracts you to someone. It's sort of the polar opposite, isn't it?
Yes, it's like mate selection. You're looking for your mate. You want to make sure that they don't have undesirable traits. And so your body does it for you. Even if your head hasn't caught up yet, your body's already feeling the disgust to be like, hold on, this is not the person for you, because you won't be able to continue the species that way.
Talk to me about disgust sensitivity. This is something we all have to varying degree, and it's a way to kind of quantify how grossed out you'll be to things. What is it, and how does it apply to this?
Even disgust sensitivity is ingrained in that protective mechanism. So how protective you are of yourself and of your offspring and who you are, that all has to deal with your disgust sensitivity. Those who are more likely to be narcissistic or has narcissism tendencies will feel higher disgust propensity. That is coded in research. There are many papers regarding that as well. But all of it goes back to kind of like that biological factor. If you think about social Darwinism and all of that, it's survival of the fittest. It's in your body to protect yourself from yourself, others, the environment, the culture that you're in, to make sure that you can essentially be the best and live. That's really what it is.
While doing your research to try to understand the ick, did you talk to people? Did you review videos online? Did you read things people had written about it? And if so, what were some of the strangest, funniest, and weird ick triggers that you found?
This was probably the most fun about working on this paper. It was just trying to, gather our, data and trying to code and figure out how it relates to disgust and narcissism. And we were looking at TikTok videos, we were watching movies, we were looking back in time, we were reading books, we were reading blogs, we were looking at all of this different evidence. And it was showing the funniest thing. Someone said, I don't like the way the sound of someone's feet slapping on the ground as they're walking barefoot.
My girlfriend complains that I'm heavy-footed all the time. Now I got something to worry about, Chloe.
Yes. Some people say it's like, it's when we see someone, they're sitting at a coffee shop on a high chair and their legs are dangling and I wanted to vomit.
Trivial stuff.
Yeah, it's like all these reasons, which is why it led to us to think, like, does it have to do with disgust? Does it have to do with narcissism? Because it's not like they cheated. It's not like, they
have leprosy.
Yeah, have leprosy. It's not like they actually have a venereal disease that's going to be passed down for generations to come. So why is slapping your foot on the ground something that matters? And so that's what led to the research and everything. And it was very interesting.
Well, speak for yourself when it comes to intergenerational VD. Women report getting the ick a little more than men. Do you think women are just being more honest, or is there something else going on?
Well, if we're talking about research and you want to talk about a biological factor, it's because there's research that women have more parental investment in their offspring, which is why they feel the disgust propensity more. They have a higher disgust propensity because they're more, it's coded in their biology to protect their young. And it's that parental investment in their young that makes them experience it more because they're like, this is not good for my future children, and this is not a good gene that I want to combine my gene with. And that's why women feel it more. However, I would say the data show that it's actually the difference in terms of percentage is not extremely high. It's not like women are 90% feeling it and men are only 10%. To be honest, it's more of like, think of it like in the 50s or 40-50 at best.
Ick, is it something to be recovered from? For example, I don't think my girlfriend knew I was heavy-footed until our downstairs neighbor recommended carpets. And now she notices it. I have to wear Crocs, or she says I'm stomping. I don't think she has the ick from my stomping, but I am a little worried. But I guess to my question, if it develops quickly and you're with someone for a long time, is there a way to get over it?
I would say yes, because but that would be like the next step of the ick research, if you will. Like if we were going to continue this line of, discovery, that would be probably, me and Elena, when we're all talking about it, like perhaps the next step is to figure out, can you recover? Is it recoverable? Because the whole reason that this paper came about was actually because I brought it up to Dr. Collison. I was experiencing the ick.
Well, tell me about it, Chloe.
Yeah, I was experiencing the ick from my current partner. He was using a lot of baby talk, and I was like, oh my gosh, like it's not cute. I didn't find it cute. But I was so attracted to him, and I was so confused. Like he's so nurturing, he's so caring, he hits all of the boxes. But why am I like over something so superficial? Like you said, like how could I do that? And we actually had broken up and then gotten back together, and now he does it all the time, this baby talk, and I find it the most endearing quality. Like it's what I love the most. Actually, when he doesn't do that, I feel like something's wrong, and then we have to talk about it. And so I do think it could be recoverable if we're talking about personal experience, but in terms of research, we'll have to definitely collect more data on it. But I do think that if you want to use a phrase like love conquers all, like if you are really feeling that and it is above. Because at the end of the day, even though it could be coded in our biology, biology and culture is always a mix, right? And so depending on the influence, whichever one wins out, if your girlfriend, I do believe your girlfriend will get over it, especially, since I'm sure you guys are still having a really loving relationship.
Oh, that's quite a wild claim you've made. Chloe, thank you very much for doing the show. I appreciate you talking about the ick from an academic perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Chloe Yin has done work in organizational psychology at the University of Southern California. Coming up next, we will discuss when your coworkers steal ideas from you. What impact does it really have on you, on where you work? I'm David Cooper. This is The Last Show.
Your nightly dose of unfiltered opinions and unexpected conversations. The Last Show with David Cooper.
We've all had someone steal credit for our great idea at work. It feels awful. And according to the science, it actually is awful. But how bad is it really? How bad is it when your big, juicy idea gets hijacked by Chad from marketing? Also, you, Chad. I'm here with Dr. David Zweig, professor of organizational behavior at University of Toronto, Scarborough. To discuss this, he's recently written on the topic. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Okay, let's talk about knowledge theft, I think is the academic way of describing this behavior. How do you know when it's happened? And how do people know how to deal with it, just other than that overwhelming urge to scream when it happens?
Yeah, you know when it's happened, right? So if this has happened to you, you are very aware that someone has taken your idea or taken your work and taken credit for it. It's really obvious that it's happened to you. And it may not necessarily be obvious to the person who's done it, but often it is intentional. And that was the point of all of this research, uncovering why people do this and what the impact is on people who are victims of knowledge theft.
Your study says that 91% of people in the workplace have either seen or experienced this. This is an extremely high number. At this point, it's just something to expect on a daily basis.
Yeah, 91% of the people in our study, so not in the workplace as a whole, but in one of our initial studies, it was a huge number of people who either said that they experienced it, they've seen it happen to other people, or that they've done it to other people themselves, which blew my mind.
And what kind of damage does it cause? What are people reporting about how they feel? What are people reporting about the impact it has on their career? Things like this.
Yeah, obviously, people get really upset when this happens to them. They see it happening in real time and they're like, what the hell just happened? That was my idea and they just took credit for it. Or that was my work and they just put their name on it and didn't acknowledge my efforts at all. And it's like shock that this is occurring. And then it's like, I'm angry. So it releases a lot of negative emotions. And then what we tend to do is we remember this. One of the most interesting things about the study was that we found that it not only affects people in their current organization, if this happened to you in an organization that you worked for in the past, you carry the baggage of this occurring into your new organization. So this really lasts.
Wow. Or the impression of the old organization, if you see the person who did it to you in a later job, maybe they've switched employers too, you see them around at a conference. This is not something people forget.
No, they don't forget this. And again, they carry it across with them, regardless of where they're actually working.
Are there tiers to it? For example, believe it or not, before I was in media, I had a normal human being job and I managed 7 people. And one of the people who reported to me once accused me of doing it as a manager. Yeah. And I just thoughtlessly forgot to give him credit. I made sure in the next meeting he got credit. I was glad he spoke up. But I guess my question is it different when your boss does it versus when a peer does it?
It hurts both ways, but yeah, it does really hurt when it's your boss that's not acknowledging that was your idea or that was your work that they've taken credit for. It also hurts when your colleagues do it and everyone's trying to get ahead. So, there's no surprise that people will engage in knowledge theft, but the impact that it has on people is really deep. So it's great that you corrected it and then gave that colleague acknowledgement afterwards. And that is a great way to repair the relationship. But many of us don't, because it's an ambiguous kind of a behavior, right? So sometimes we don't know if they did it intentionally or they just forgot and we don't know what we can do. Can we call it out? Should we just stay silent? Should we hope it doesn't happen again? So there's a lot of ambiguity there. But we as victims of this feel like it's intentional. And so that's how we react.
You'd mentioned the impact it has on people, how they carry it with them. What does that impact have on their behavior? Do people become more secretive, more spiteful, or do they just learn how to play office politics better? What happens when I carry the baggage with me of someone stealing credit for my work?
So it's all of those things. So what we found in our study was basically people will engage in something called defensive silence. So they will remain silent when asked for input or ideas in the future because they're trying to protect what's theirs. They're trying to restore their territory, right? Or when they're asked directly for their knowledge or their input, they'll engage in knowledge hiding. They either play dumb, they pretend they don't know, or they might be evasive around sharing everything or sharing all of their ideas. And so that has an impact, obviously, on knowledge transfer in organizations. And then we often react negatively in terms of trying to retaliate against the person who stole that knowledge from us. So we might, badmouth them. We might, be very suspicious. We might find ways to try and undermine them. So this act of knowledge theft has a lot of negative impacts on people's future behavior.
What concerns me is if it was done by accident, and if the person who stole the knowledge or took credit for the idea would have corrected it had they have known. If they're not told, it plants a seed of bad behavior, spite. It plants a really negative seed. So this is something people need to be aware of.
Yeah. So if you know that you might have done this, if someone brings this to your attention, like the colleague you mentioned, that's great. It gives you a chance to recover and restore the relationship. And you may not have intended to do it at all. It might have just been an oversight. But they're assuming that you're doing it intentionally. And so if they don't call it out, or if other people don't call that out, that assumption will hold, and then you get all these negative outcomes.
Let's talk just how serious this is. In your official, professional, academic opinion, as a researcher and a professor, what is worse, stealing someone's lunch from the fridge or their PowerPoint presentation?
I think the PowerPoint presentation. We can recover from having someone stealing our food. It is a lot harder to recover from having part of ourselves, right? Our ideas or our work taken by another, and I'm taking credit for it.
In your research here, did you come across any wild, egregious, horrifying examples of taking credit or knowledge theft?
Yeah, lots of examples in different areas, different industries, all around the common theme, right? It was something that I did, some idea that I had. For example, we had a graduate student who claimed they had an idea for a paper. Someone else took that idea and got it published.
Oh, wow. That's really bad.
That's a big deal. And we had people at work saying, I did all of this work on this PowerPoint or this new plan, and then my boss just took credit for it all and never acknowledged my effort. And, the impact is awful in terms of I'm not going to put in that work, or I'm not going to share my knowledge in the future if that's what I think the reaction is going to be or the outcome is going to be.
So the way to call this out, or the way to deal with this, is for bosses, for people who might have done this accidentally as an oversight, and for peers watching it happen. The best way to prevent all the negativity here is to call it out early and just identify it and hopefully take corrective action, because it can really fester this.
Absolutely. And remember that, when we found that this huge incidents of this occurring, it was also people telling us that they've witnessed it occurring to other people. So other people are seeing it too. So it is, we do have to call it out when it happens. Particularly if you're a leader, you got to make sure that everyone is getting the credit that they deserve. But even if you're a colleague and you see someone else taking credit for another person's work, call it out and just say, hey, I thought that was, X's idea. And that's enough to restore credit for people and put a stop to all this negative behavior.
You've got a book coming out on topics like this. Anything else we can expect to see in it?
Yeah, there's going to be more on this. And right now I'm looking at the perpetrators, the knowledge thieves, and seeing why they steal knowledge from others. I'm going to be talking about just deviance as a whole, workplace deviance as a whole, and how organizations are set up to actually make us more deviant. It's not that we're all bad. It's just the situations that we're in and the way leaders lead, and this, the way leaders have this illusion of control that actually makes us behave in a more deviant ways.
Workplace deviance is so funny to me and so fascinating to me, because it's the one environment where you're supposed to keep it professional, and it's the one environment where bad actors really can act badly. And
oh yeah, they can thrive. Yeah, that
can often be hilarious, but also very upsetting.
Yeah, absolutely. Depending on the environment you're working in, these kinds of people who promote it tend to thrive.
Well, Dr. David Zweig is a professor of organizational behavior at the University of Toronto, Scarborough. David, thanks for chatting with me today. And I didn't steal any of your work in preparation for this, did I?
No, you didn't. Not at all. Thanks a lot, David. Appreciate it.
After the break, Conspiracy Corner. We'll discuss the real climate change conspiracy. There was a verifiable disinformation campaign by big oil companies. Now, why would a big oil company want to spread disinformation? And what does that say about disinformation that's been spread today? These are questions that we will answer in just a few moments. Conspiracy Corner up next.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. The last show with David Cooper. Procrastinate your life away with us.
Smoking, not good for you. But if you would have read the scientific literature about it in the 50s and 60s, you would have seen academic medical publishing funded by tobacco companies, not because they knew that smoking was good for you. They kind of knew it was bad for you. They just wanted to confuse things. And we will talk about this process as it applies to climate science. Here with Dr. Lee Kuhnle, it's Conspiracy Corner. Lee, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, David. It's always great to be here.
It is. It was a bit of a confusing introduction, but I just wanted to introduce this concept of muddying the waters, stirring confusion. When you want to make a point and you know your point is kind of wrong or not backed up by science, rather than outright saying, oh, my point's correct, you just start adding little bits of science and little bits of research and little bits of newspaper articles questioning the science. You don't go as far as to say something like smoking is good for you. You just say like, oh, 7 doctors have doubt about, little things like that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And in fact, you bring up a really great example, because what I'm about to talk about was really modeled on the disinformation campaign that Big Tobacco used, especially in the lead up to the 90s, when there was real public concern about the health risks of smoking. And it's really maybe useful at the end of this process to think about how we think today about tobacco, and how there's really among the public a consensus that smoking is bad for you, whereas that consensus does not exist today in the same degree about what the products of big oil and the fossil industry are doing to our climate.
They used to think smoking was good for you and it opened up your lungs, like the coughing, so that you could absorb more oxygen. And this was so well thought of that like a 1920s Tour de France, long distance cyclists need to be able to breathe in order to do their job. So there's pictures of them at the base of like the Pyrenees Mountains, like the big peloton of cyclists, and they're all lighting up, having cigarettes, getting ready for the big climb. Like that's how much they believed this stuff at the time.
Sure. And look, you can say that, and I don't know this one way or the other, but you could be forgiven for thinking this maybe in the 1920s, where medical science was obviously not as advanced as it was. The scandal, though, obviously comes in the fact that in the 70s and 80s, the tobacco company's own internal research was demonstrating that their products were leading to really dangerous diseases in the people who were using them. And then it becomes a market issue and something like a market share issue for these companies, something that they're going to really want to take seriously and get ahead of. And that is for Big Tobacco, where the disinformation came in, and it works exactly the way you're saying. All you need to do is suggest that there is not consensus in the medical establishment. What that does for the rest of us is suggest that, well, the data is probably not that overwhelming in one way, and so they'll probably figure it out. I mean, if it were really overwhelming, there would be a consensus. So all you need to do is suggest that, hey, maybe not even 7 out of 10 doctors, but 3 or 4 out of 10 doctors are not sure whether the science is legitimate. And that sows enough doubt that it can even lead to, political consequences. Like, let's not reduce the amount of smoking in restaurants or whatever.
Before we get to climate science, I want to talk about how this process works a little bit more. We see it in young Earth creationism, which is a belief held by some Christians, especially in the U.S., evangelical Christians, that the Earth is 5,000 some odd years old, maybe 6,000, because that's what the Bible says. So they'll fund their own academic papers and have their own journals and stuff that sort of postures as science, and they'll say, no, the data from the soil says the Earth is 6,000 years old. We have evidence that the dinosaurs lived amongst humans, things like this. We see it there, and it's enough to have a little bit of doubt for the person who doesn't understand these things to say, oh, there's disagreement in the scientific community about how old the Earth is, when there basically is none. period.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the same playbook went down with COVID, the COVID vaccine, and some of the measures that were put in place there. It was, again, some rogue expert was trotted out to suggest that, well, it's uncertain and we don't know. And sometimes these experts aren't really experts. And sometimes there are sort of front organizations that parade as though they are, disinterested and objective. But sometimes they're just straight up like very credentialed, smart experts who, though, do not represent the knowledge in their field, who have, in a sense, gone rogue. And both of these, really can do a lot of damage in terms of public discourse where things are already so complicated. There are so many things that I am not an expert in. I would say almost everything I am not an expert in. And so I need to rely on other experts to tell me what I'm supposed to do in this or that situation. And when I am left now in a position, because these disinformation campaigns are so sophisticated, where I can't really tell unless I spend hours on this stuff, what organization is funded by whom and what political affiliations they might have, it really confuses me. And I might just retreat to things like, what does my family think?
And that's the goal of a disinformation campaign, for you to throw up your hands and say, I just don't know. I can't decide. This one group's saying that, this other group is saying that, so I'm just not going to believe anyone, and I won't believe the science because I can't parse it out. I don't have a doctorate in physics. I don't have a doctorate in medicine. And then that's the goal. You walk away from scientific data, one that's studied, cited, done in a proper peer-reviewed fashion, one that's funded by bad actors, and you walk away and say, I don't believe either.
Yeah, exactly. And this just happens so often that it goes some way to explaining some of the mess that we are finding ourselves in right now.
I'm guilty of it, I'm sure. There's certain things that I should believe and I won't because the water's too muddy. There's too many voices and I don't know who to believe and I'm not an expert. Climate science.
Yeah.
We've been off track, but I feel like the mechanism for which people cannot believe things or have some doubt against certain things is well understood at this point. We've given lots of examples, and it should be no surprise to anyone that when the first papers and first studies of climate change were coming out, this was an affront to big oil's business. People want to sell fuel. They want to make money. They want to build cars. And if you're saying that's causing damage to the environment, and the papers are just coming out, it serves them to put out disinformation.
Well, you're absolutely right. Now, you started by saying this should not be a surprise to anybody, but I will admit that this was a surprise to me because the amount of evidence that these fossil fuel companies and related actors had going right back into the 60s, if not earlier, is overwhelming. So I think the first way to start this is just by establishing the fact that the industry players knew that their products were going to cause serious harm in the form of global warming and also in terms of generally in pollution, and that they needed to get ahead of this because it was going to be a massive problem for their industry and their bottom line. The first time that this is raised in any public way that I know of, in 1959, Edmund Teller, of the nuclear bomb fame, he gives a talk to 300 industry leaders. These are like the top executives and scientists of what I'm just going to, for convenience sake, call big oil. And he explains the greenhouse mechanism. He's like, this is what's going to happen. If you keep putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, this is what's going to happen. In the 1960s, then, the industry starts to take this potential problem super seriously and begins to do its own internal research. And by the end of the 60s, latest by the 1970s, they know totally what's going to happen. They got dates like 2025, they're predicting what we're seeing right now.
The stage is set to talk about big oil's disinformation campaign to confuse everyone about climate science. We're in the 1970s here with Dr. Lee Kuhnle. It's Conspiracy Corner. We'll be back with more of whatever this show is in a moment.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. Taste the forbidden fruit of knowledge. The Last Show with David Cooper.
It's Conspiracy Corner. I am David Cooper. I'm here with Dr. Lee Kuhnle. We're talking about Big Oil's disinformation campaign to muddy the waters so that the early science in the 1950s, 60s, 70s showing that excessive fossil fuel consumption would cause a greenhouse gas effect that would cause climate change. In the 1980s, there's a great video of Carl Sagan, who was Neil deGrasse Tyson's mentor. If you've ever seen Neil deGrasse Tyson's work, sort of like he's basically Neil deGrasse Tyson in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. He testified in Congress that this happened on the planet Venus. Like Venus has an atmosphere that traps in sun rays using the greenhouse gas effect. And that's why Venus is way hotter than it should be. It's not actually that much closer to the sun than us. And yet the surface temperatures are extremely high. And so he's basically saying it happened on that planet, it could happen to us, and it is a real runaway effect. It's a cascading effect. Lee, welcome back. We're talking loosely about big oil starting to understand that what's happening now on the planet would happen if we kept consuming fossil fuel.
Yeah. So there are a bunch of internal studies. And I know it makes for great radio if I'm waving, primary sources around, but there are a lot of studies that are actually publicly available if anybody is interested in downloading these files, where the industry scientists are talking to the industry leaders. And these are internal studies by, say, for example, ExxonMobil, just to give one. And I have a study here from 1979 where they clearly say the CO2 buildup will cause adverse environmental effects in enough areas of the world. This is a direct quote, to consider limiting the future use of fossil fuels as a major energy source. That's Exxon in 1979 talking to their own experts. Okay, so we also have a leaked document or a discovered document, again from inside the industry. This one comes from 1989, where they actually discuss how they're going to go about doing this disinformation campaign. And a lot of it rests on, as you said earlier, David, getting certain, I guess I would call them rogue experts and maybe front organizations with names like Americans for Tax Reform, a seemingly rather innocuous organization, which is actually a front organization for a lot of these fossil industries, to muddy the waters about the science. And they actually have a list of how they would know it would be, when they will have reached effectiveness. And so they say things like, when the media understands the uncertainties in climate science. That's a direct quote from one of these documents. That's in 1998. This is 20 years after the Exxon study, which was already, 10 years after they knew for sure. And so what do? Well, I'll give you one example, okay, because, they do a lot. They put a lot. There's, if any of your listeners want to look into some of the stuff, The Guardian has done some great reporting on it. And there's some a retrospective on oil and gas ads that have not at all aged well, that come from, especially like the 1990s.
Aged like milk.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Which say things like doomsday canceled and we really don't know about climate science and all that kind of stuff.
Well, there's also they'll fund researchers who look into volcanic emissions because volcanoes can create the greenhouse gas effect too. And then they'll say things like, well, maybe it's all volcanoes and it's not. Well, no. They'll come up with science adjacent ways to do it. They'll come up with some kernel of truth. Yes, volcanoes contribute to the greenhouse gas effect. So they'll really amplify that, and they'll say, well, we don't know that it's fossil fuels, could be volcanoes, things like that, right?
Exactly. So I'll give you one example of how they actually went about doing this. The Cato Institute, it's a sort of a right-wing political think tank, free market, libertarian, small government, and they're also climate skeptics. It's worth noting that the founder of the Cato Institute was Charles Koch, amongst others, of Koch Industries, right? big extractive industries. He gives $20 million of seed money in 1977. And Cato starts to spread climate disinformation. And they host a conference in 1991. And on the blurb of this conference, so they invite, all these like climate experts, quote unquote. And on the blurb of the conference, it says, the notion that global warming is a fact and will be catastrophic is drilled into people to the point where it seems surprising that anyone would question it. And yet, underlying it is very little evidence at all. And then they have all these presenters who basically toe that party line. Richard Lindzen, who is an atmospheric physicist, Harvard grad, 200 papers. I'll give you a quote of his. This wasn't from that conference, but he says, accepting the Kyoto protocols would be doing nothing at great expense. And then there's a guy, Patrick Michaels. He wasn't a climate scientist, but he, a couple of months earlier, or maybe it was a year earlier, had done sort of a test run in a couple of states to see whether you could reposition global warming from fact to theory. And it worked out great. And so he gives a talk at this conference, basically, again, sort of aimed at industry leaders to suggest, actually, public opinion is relatively volatile on this. You can shift people's opinions. And that's the kind of stuff that Cato was up to. And then, of course, you see like the Informed Citizens for the Environment. This is another front organization, Americans for Tax Reform. They're funding, or they seem to be the funders for some of these ads, which really muddy the waters, to continue on what you were saying earlier. And this takes us then from a point when in the mid-'80s, there was relative consensus among those people who knew about global warming that something needed to be done, to the time after this disinformation campaign had been going for about 20 years, when now there's a real political divide. And it really goes along the question of, can we really trust the science? And it depends what poll you look at, but there was a Pew Research poll from 2022, I think. And just over 50% of Americans thought that climate change was a serious problem. And it is a serious problem, I mean, it's not, and I liked how you started, David, with the question around cigarettes. You wouldn't get those numbers with smoking, right? Even smokers know that smoking cigarettes is not good for their health. It's not like 50% of smokers are like, oh, well, you can't really trust the science.
We needed a generation of people around smokers to die for people to finally get it. And we're starting to see more and more issues with climate, flooding, hurricanes. Like, we're starting to see the effects. The instance of like global airline turbulence has gone up, and I don't know that that's connected to climate change. They're not 100% sure on that, but they know something's changing in the atmosphere. But isn't it awful that scientists studying climate science, geologists, people, meteorologists, all kinds of people, they just want to do their science, and then they have to become political to advocate for themselves. It's like Galileo was just looking at his telescope and he realized the Earth wasn't the center of the universe. And the Romans put him under house arrest, Yeah,
the Catholics. But yeah, and in this, right, in this milieu, and you're absolutely right about the climate scientists, because
Roman Catholic, sorry.
You're absolutely right, David. The climate scientists are scientists. They're not public speakers and they're not public relations experts. And sometimes, I'll just cite ClimateGate as an example of how their naivete in this field of disinformation really derailed one of maybe the best chances in the last 15 years to do something about climate change, which was the Copenhagen Summit in 2009, which was derailed because of the leak of the emails and because of their inability to effectively communicate what they were actually doing. It's bleak.
Every time you throw up your arms about a scientific or medical opinion and you say, I just can't know, or I just don't know, or it's too hard to decide, you should look at whether you're falling victim to disinformation. Lee, what a pleasure it is. Check out Dr. Lee Kuhnle's podcast, The Uncover Up. Lee is a political science professor at Humber Polytechnic. Lee, what a pleasure it is to have you on the show.
Thanks so much, David.
Up next, the horrible reason zombie sea lions are attacking people on the West Coast. Don't believe me? True life zombie details in a minute. I'm David Cooper. This is The Last Show.
We're broadcasting relationship truths and scientific discoveries with a comedian's touch. The Last Show with David Cooper.
Sea lions are no longer the goofy, lovable ocean Labradors we all thought they once were. They're biting swimmers, chasing surfers, and probably staging a full-scale marine uprising. But what could it be? Rabies? Demonic possession? No, it's just your friendly neighborhood toxic algae and climate change at play here, which somehow feels a lot worse. I'm here with John Warner, the CEO of the Marine Mammal Care Center in Los Angeles, to talk all things sea lions that aren't doing so well. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Okay, I know I exaggerated there.
Just a little, yeah.
But what on earth is happening with sea lions on the coast? Should people be canceling their beach vacations?
Oh, no, not at all. They're sick. They're not feeling well. I don't know about you, but when I'm not feeling well, I'm not really nice, and I don't want to puddle with my own species, let alone another species. And that's what's going on. So to be more scientifically specific about it, there's a toxic algae bloom off the coast of Southern California. We have been seeing these every year now for 4 years, and this one is really bad. Climate change, I love the fact that you brought that into your opening comment. That's most likely why we are seeing this so frequently with something that used to be every 3 to 7 years. And it's a neurological toxin.
Great. Fantastic. Isn't this great news? Toxic algal bloom. We got neurological. This is great news. I'm so happy to hear all of this. How is it adversely affecting marine animals? And it's not just sea lions, as I understand it.
Yeah, so sea lions and dolphins tend to bear the brunt of these toxic algae blooms along with marine birds. It can show up in other marine mammal species. We just don't generally see that because elephant seals, fur seals, harbor seals, they're not necessarily foraging and eating in the same area. And so the animals that are eating the toxin, right, that has been ingested into the food chain by these little fish, and marine mammals eat little fish or big fish that eat little fish, it gets into their system and it's neurological. So they end up with seizures, just like an epileptic seizure you would see. Foaming at the mouth from the seizure, not because it's rabies at all, and it's not communicable by a bite. It has to be ingested into a mammal system, and you get it that way. So people swimming in the ocean, you're not going to get it.
Side note, don't drink the seawater also?
No. If you swallow, first of all, if you swallow enough seawater to even have that remote possibility, you're probably got other issues with all the salt you just ingested before DA would ever get to your system. You're going to get it if you eat fish that you don't clean very well and you eat the guts, the intestinal system, the stomach, all that yucky stuff. So people who love Dungeness crab but think that gushy, yucky stuff in the middle of the body is a delicacy, that's how they would get it.
Oh, wow. So there is a slight, minute theoretical possibility people could get it too. Let's talk about domoic acid. It is unfortunate that it rhymes with demonic acid, or it's not so far away from demonic acid. How does it turn sea lions from playful puppies to submarine nightmares?
Well, I'll take issue with the categorization, and whoever came up with demonic instead of demoic, I really would love to have a chat with. Because it implies that these animals are something to be feared, and that is the furthest thing from the truth. They're sick right now. When they are not sick, they are still the cuddle puddle experts, fun, charismatic, social animals that we love watching from afar, using our Zoom camera, not taking selfies, because we want to live with wildlife and love them, not love them to death, right? So got my soundbite in there. They are affected. So they're sick. They're stranding on beaches in a comatose-like state. They still have adrenaline that will flow through them if people get close to them, dogs, people, etc. And that will initiate a fight or flight kind of response, just like we would do. And so they are reacting. They are not attacking. That is the big difference here. So they are never going to just charge somebody on the beach if you're sitting there drinking your Mai Tai and enjoying the sun. If you go after an animal, we see this all the time, people will charge a big male animal and that big male animal goes into the water. That big male animal can take you down. They're very nice that they don't. Right now, they just happen to be sick. So the bites are happening in the water where people don't see the animal, and it's in that surf line because they are seizing and disoriented. They can't get back out of the water easily, and the animal doesn't sense the person. So the combination of a person and an animal getting that close, animal freaks out and bites.
In general, animals don't really want to harm you. Just stay away from them unless they're one of the most deadly, most aggressive, biggest jerks of the animal kingdom, the Canada geese. They will attack you for no reason. But let's not go into the geese. I take issues with these honking nightmares.
Hey, everything wants to live and live in peace. So, if
not the geese,
they feel the need to peck at you to get you out of their way.
Not the geese. They want to live in chaos. Let's move jokes away here and get to the cold hard facts here. Is this fatal for the seals?
Yes. So what we've been seeing over the last decades are DA blooms where you can recover and treat and have returned back to the ocean a decent percentage of these animals, over 50%. Generally, we have experienced when the blooms have not been as toxic as they are right now, 65% of the animals recover and are being released back to the ocean. For dolphins, it's a mortality event. So this year we saw more dolphins than we've ever seen before come up on the beach. The ones that were still alive, they're seizing, they're never going to recover. Wow. So the only option is humane euthanasia, which, our two vets had to do that for 2 weeks, almost start every morning going out and having to euthanize dolphins that stranded. Not a easy thing to do. The sea lions, we can bring them in. There's a whole treatment protocol, but even with this year's event, we're averaging probably 50% or a bit less in terms of our ability to get them healthy enough to go back home. It's got a lot to do with sort of the toxicity levels of the algae. Every year it's a little different. The timing of the year, the female animals are all pregnant, so they give birth at the Channel Islands. So Southern California is so amazing. 85% of California sea lions are born on the Channel Islands off Southern California. Largest congregation of blue whales anywhere on planet Earth, Channel Islands, Southern California. So it's a rich, amazing ecosystem that is being thrown a lot of things at it. And if we just do a little bit better, imagine what these animals can do in terms of resiliency into the future.
Well, you've made me feel terrible for cracking jokes at the beginning of our talk here. How many individuals will get infected with this deadly toxin? Once they do get infected, you're telling me the mortality rates are really, really high, but how many will get infected?
So that is a question we have no answer to. We know how many animals strand on beaches. We know how many animals are deceased and come up on beaches. But we don't know what that X factor, multiplier factor is of animals that we don't see, that sink to the bottom of the ocean, that are drowning because they're seizing. We don't know. What we do know is that with 4 years in a row, we are concerned about what the effects on the population as a whole are. There are still hundreds of thousands of sea lions off the coast of California. The last count, which, these are best guess counts, right? Using good data, but you still don't know, roughly around 250,000 animals. We have not seen 250,000 animals strand in Southern California this year. So it does not affect every animal, but it affects a large enough volume to overwhelm our hospital, other stranding organization hospitals, for the public to see animals daily on the beach that are sick. And that's in the hundreds. Again, what the X factor is, we just don't know. But I'd say we're concerned because this is now an annualized event on top of other things that we're doing to them.
Is there anything people can do?
Yes, use your voice. So at this point, climate change, these big, heady issues require us to advocate. Individually, we're powerful. Collectively, even more so. Things have to change on a systemic level. That requires us to demand it.
John Warner is the CEO of the Marine Mammal Care Center in Los Angeles. John, thanks for talking to me and putting up with my silliness, but also getting the facts out.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Coming up, live in a big city but tired of the grind. Well, we'll talk to one woman who left New York City for small town life to live in the Appalachians, off the grid, growing squash, and dealing with donkeys on a donkey farm. It's going to be a fun one coming up next.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. We're here because your heightened awareness deserves heightened entertainment. The last show with David Cooper.
Ever wonder what a simpler life might be like? Maybe on a farm far away from the grind of a city. Well, our next guest left New York City for a donkey farm in Tennessee. Seriously, she lives off the grid, writes plays, wrestles snakes, and does all that instead of bearing a subway crowd. But could leaving the grind make your life better? That is what we'll discuss here with Sari Caine, a chess champion New Yorker turned Appalachian writer. Sari, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a thrill to, someone was on the receiving end and get reached out to. I appreciate it.
It's our pleasure to have you. You're a third generation New Yorker. What is the moment where someone who lives in a city like this realizes, yep, I'm packing it up. I'm moving to Tennessee?
It is a long story, and I have a memoir I'm working on called Checkmating. But I did not have that moment. The pandemic happened. I went to a chess master friend's house in Kentucky, and that was going to be a week till things reopened, and they did not reopen. So my life as a chess teacher, player, performer, writer, artistic director just had ground to a halt. And then I couldn't pay the rent. And then the week and a half stretched to a year and a half. And I did not know what to do. I did not know where to go. I couldn't afford anything. I did not have a landlord reference at that point. And friends said, well, why don't you apply for an artist residency? And I said, because it's the pandemic and that doesn't exist in the pandemic, but it did. So I got a 6-month artist residency on a donkey farm in a small town in Tennessee. And I'd only been here before for chess nationals when I was like 11. So I went, I thought, I'll work on my play, I'll fix this up, and then I'll go to Mexico or Nepal or something, right?
You'll travel.
Because what do you do when you live in New York your whole life and then suddenly, because I'm still trying desperately to like paddle back. I'm thinking, I'm going to resume my life. The pandemic will end. I'll resume everything. But
I'm pretty sure it has ended. I'm not 100%. Yeah, it has ended. But keep going.
It's not yet over. So I unexpectedly, I fell in love with someone in the town. And really serendipitously, we ended up living in a really beautiful brand new cabin off grid in the woods with the stickers still on the door. And our landladies are part of the Humane Society where I had been volunteering for longer story reasons. And it just happened really serendipitously. He worked at the alcohol and drug clinic. We both needed a place to stay. And this randomly popped up.
I know the pandemic shifted a lot of people's view of what their lives were, what their routines were. It sounds like a lot for you. That halting of our lives gave us room to kind of creatively think how we want to live them. Or maybe things just shifted, like you couldn't make rent or you couldn't get a landlord reference. Side note, landlord references in New York are a horrible part of housing here. That is a deeper conversation for another time. But before all that, when people left the city, like I have friends who are in it with me, in the city, doing city things, being, people in their 30s who are single, and then they get married and have kids and they go live in, I don't know, suburban New Jersey. And I kind of scoff at them, and I know I shouldn't, but I do. What did you do when people did that before you left?
Well, I didn't see myself having a family. I didn't see myself. I had so many children in my life. I didn't need to bring them home with me. As a teacher, and, while I was performing, and I grew up performing. I was a kid actress from the age of 3. I was getting published as a writer at 10, and I was a chess champion as a kid. And so I just felt like I couldn't shift that train track. I didn't think I could get off. I knew I loved being in the country, and I'd think, God, that must be great for those people who get to do that. If I got on a train going to those suburbs you talked about, I'd think, wow, people live here.
Yeah.
But I'd also think like, wait, so they leave at 8 or 7 or 6, and then they come back at 6, and then they start over and they do it again. And it didn't relate to me. And I wasn't able to let go of what I thought I was supposed to be doing. And for most people, what they think they're supposed to be doing is not, become a actor, writer, chess teacher, only a more successful version. It's like settle down, get a family, get a good job. And that was just not my background. So getting this space really, really enabled me to start thinking like, what is this serving me anymore? This is a short show, so, I'm trying to keep it brief, but I'd had a total breakdown before this happened and joined recovery. I was now sober. I was ready for change. I knew that my life was like a Groundhog Day and I didn't know what to do. I didn't think anything could be done.
I am here with Sari Caine, a New Yorker who left the grind for rural Tennessee, a donkey farm. You're in good company, Sari. I also am 5 years sober, and there's something to be said for the cliche that New York City can eat you up and spit you out, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I love my city. I know it like the palm of my hand. It is in my blood, and I could be totally cool with never being there again.
You mentioned trains before. There was something funny in an article here about the R trains versus rattlesnakes. Which is scarier, handling a rattlesnake on the farm on your property or boarding a busy R train late at night?
Look, I mean, I'm like, for me, getting my driver's license I just got it. I was on the subway as I'm not someone who hates the subway. I'm like, oh, is it cold? Great, I'm getting on the train. All those strangers will,
Yeah, I like the trains. I mean, they're filthy, they're awful, but they're also amazing.
Yeah, and they were better back in the 90s when you couldn't have one monopoly of ads and they had graffiti and it was, it was fun and entertaining. But no, it was like a new pair of clothes, right? Like I had overgrown what I was wearing and I was refusing to put another pair of clothes on.
Do you think the grind lifestyle is becoming outdated, or is it just like a different type of living versus what you're doing now?
I mean, I don't want to talk for anyone else. You're sober, you get it. For me, it kept me apart from a big part of my brain. Right? I mean, I was always moving. I was always going from one thing to another thing. And it didn't make it in the article because it's a tiny article, but, I miss the diversity and as well as the variety for sure. But I was moving so quickly, I didn't have time to catch up with myself. And I'll never regret being a young artist and a young performer in the Lower East Side and all the things and museums and culture and everything. But I really want to be in the grass with a donkey and having my family here and chewing on the straw. I know for some people they're like, oh my God, get me out of that, right? There's nothing going on. But I never really needed, I don't know. I shouldn't say I never needed things going on, but
I got to ask my last question here about donkeys. They are not stereotypically the most friendly animals. They can be stubborn. Do you think your time spent dealing with New Yorkers on the street, also a stubborn bunch, served you well for dealing with donkeys? And second part to this question, what do you do on a donkey farm?
Well, it was an artist residency. So I was socializing. My part of the community service was socializing the donkeys while I was doing my writing.
But the first part, does dealing with New Yorkers help you deal with donkeys?
Probably something I appreciate about New Yorkers that I haven't found anywhere else is that we tell you what we mean. If we're like, no, we don't want to meet you for coffee, we don't, right?
Yeah, just in your face, very straightforward. It's all at its face.
It's very confusing outside of New York because the rest of the country wants to meet you for coffee and then they don't show up. And I'm like, what's going on?
Are donkeys in your face as well?
Well, the donkeys, I was having my own issues that I was recovering from, and the donkeys did not want anything to do with me. And so socializing them and gaining their trust helped me, cliche but true, regain my trust in other people, and I fell in love.
Sari, thanks for sharing your story about leaving the city for rural life. I have such trouble with that word, rural. I appreciate your time.
I think we all do. Thank you.
Sari Caine is a former chess champion and a New Yorker turned Appalachian writer. After the break, we'll talk to one clinical psychologist whose study showing that consumption of adult entertainment, that stuff you watch on the computer alone, corresponds to a decline in your relationship satisfaction and stability. Details up next. I'm David Cooper. This is The Last Show. Over the next 10 minutes, we'll be discussing how adult films affect grown-up relationships. Now, while this discussion will be with a psychologist, themes like pornography will come up. So to sensitive listeners or parents with children, listener discretion is advised.
Explore your deepest desires, if you dare. The Last Show with David Cooper.
Sexy adult videos, the ones you don't admit to watching on the internet, might turn you on. But are they turning off your relationship? New research says yes, unless your partner is the sexy pool boy. Although I'm not sure that was included in the research, so I digress. Turns out not all arousal is created equal, especially when one type involves emotional connection and the other type involves you alone at the computer. And you can guess which one might be better for your relationship. I'm here with someone who studied that. His name is Dr. Nicholas Lawless. He's a clinical psychologist and couples therapist in Melbourne, Australia. So what happens when pornography starts competing with your partner? Is that something that happens to a lot of couples?
Absolutely. It's something that we certainly found in research. It's also something that I see pretty often in my clinical work, both with individuals and with couples. It can sometimes be a bit of a case of the chicken or an egg scenario. Which one came first? Did the sex drop off, for instance, and then people started using porn to try and fill that need? Or did the porn start and then the sex drop off because the porn was getting in the way? The reality is it's probably both. Or in many instances, it could be both. Both are plausible explanations. It's happening in both ways out there. Absolutely.
Let's take a step back. I'm going to hit you with I think a smart question, probably a dumb question, but for me, smart. What exactly is pornography-induced arousal, and how is it different, like psychologically or physiologically, from the kind of arousal we get with our romantic partner, laying in bed with your boo?
Yeah, so essentially the arousal is likely to be very similar physiologically. It's not something that I studied per se, but certainly theoretically, the arousal, whether it's induced by pornography or it's induced by your partner, is likely to feel the same physiologically and have the same kind of, your sexual system is being activated in both instances. But in one instance, it's being activated and then directed towards your partner, because that's what sexual arousal does. It directs our attentions and our motivations and our behavior towards that stimulus that is inducing the arousal. And with porn, it's directing us towards porn and therefore away from our partner. So I would consider it to be you can think of it a bit like a magnet. Sexual arousal is a bit like a magnet, and it'll draw you towards whatever is arousing you. And so in the instance of a partner, obviously that's a good thing where it's fun. Certainly the research would say it's not such a great thing.
And when you looked at it, you saw a decline in satisfaction in relationships, a decline in the stability of a relationship when a partner is excessively using pornography.
Yes, that's true. And relationship quality as well.
Well, I have one theory. As an alcoholic, I can't have one sip of booze. It's a dark path, my friend. I've been sober 5 years, but my girlfriend has a pretty healthy relationship with alcohol. She can have a drink once, go a few weeks without it. She can go for a crazy night and stop. I kind of view pornography that way. I have a friend who struggles with a porn addiction. I won't name him, although I want to because I'm mean. I won't. I'm not going to. He struggles with it. He can't do it, or it really can affect his relationship adversely, while others can entertain themselves every now and again and not have much of a problem with that. That's kind of my anecdotal theory on it. Does it have any basis on what you observed when studying it?
Yeah. So certainly the more you use it, the more problematic it's going to be. It's not a case that you use it once and all of a sudden, your relationship's ended and it's the end of the world. But at what point does it become problematic? Is there a cutoff where it's this is healthy and now it's not healthy? Certainly there's not a whole lot of reason to suggest that it would be a good thing for relationships at any given point in time. So if you can avoid it I would, is kind of where I'd go with that, because the more you're being aroused by it, in terms of the more frequent and the more intense that arousal is, we know that it has a greater effect on relationship well-being over time.
Would that also mean like watching it with your partner, or is that like a kind of togetherness bonding activity? Did you look at that one? Because I hear couples do that. I've never been in a couple like that, I'll admit, but I hear couples do that.
Yeah, so certainly people do that, and the research would say that is going to be less detrimental to your relationship well-being, but it is still introducing other people into the bedroom. And if you're fantasizing about somebody else rather than fantasizing about your partner while you're having sex, for instance, because you're literally watching them there on the screen, or imagining something that you saw earlier together, that kind of thing, is that likely to kind of draw you guys closer together and bond you and make you feel attracted towards them and all those things? Probably less likely so, because essentially the theory that we were, or the hypothesis that we were testing, both in the study that we were talking about today, but also a couple of other ones that I ran as part of my PhD thesis. We were wondering whether when you got aroused, you were able to just turn that arousal towards your partner, no matter who was kind of causing the arousal in the first place, and maybe it would actually be a good thing for the relationship. But we found no, it didn't work out that way. It was, if you're being aroused by somebody else, it's not going well for your relationship.
It doesn't surprise me that an introduction of a consumption of pornography would affect intimacy, but what surprises me from your findings is it affects relationship stability. Is it really that dire? Like, would you caution all couples to stay away from it, or more just cautioning couples to like don't watch it so much?
Yeah, so like I say, I think if you want to be safe, just don't go there. I'd be asking kind of what's the value add here, and is it worth taking the risk? Because we don't know at what point it becomes a problem from the perspective of the relationship. But we found in one of our studies that we conducted on this that not only does it affect what happens inside the bedroom, but it affects what happens outside of the bedroom. So yes, it affects your sexual satisfaction and your pleasure during sex and the frequency of sex, etc. But it also affects the way that you treat your partner as far as communication goes, neglect, conflict avoidance, dehumanization. That's just your partner, the way that you treat your partner outside of the bedroom, but also the way that you treat other people outside of the relationship. So the more that you're aroused by porn, the more you sexually objectify others, the more likely you are to engage in infidelity, whether that's sexual or emotional.
Wow.
The more likely you are to pay attention to attractive alternatives in general, and the less likely you are to derogate those attractive alternatives or kind of dismiss them as being, I'm not ever going to go there. But the more likely you are to actually entertain that. So absolutely, it's affecting not just what's going on with the sex with your partner, but also the relationship with your partner outside of that, and then how you interact with people who are not your partner.
And its stability as well. What would you say to a couple where one partner uses a lot of pornography, but both of them say they're happy? Like, would you advise them to do anything differently, or is it more like a live and let live situation?
It's interesting. There are some people that come and tell me in my clinical practice, for instance, oh yeah, I use porn, but it's got nothing to do with anything. But when you know the research and then you engage in conversations with these people about what's going on, you start to realize that actually it's probably playing out for them just the way it is for everybody else. They just don't realize what's kind of going on here. And certainly when you look at the research on people's beliefs about their porn use, most people think their porn use is helping their relationship in some way, or at the very least has no effect. But when you look at the data that doesn't take into account people's beliefs about their use, you just look at the raw data of how their relationship's going and how their porn use is going, you find that it's not a good picture. So I think people would like to believe that it's good for them and their relationship, or at least it's not harming them in any way. They're in the healthy category.
Well, Nick, thanks for the chat. I've enjoyed it. Appreciate your time.
Oh, you're welcome, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Dr. Nicholas Lawless is a clinical psychologist and couples therapist in Melbourne, Australia. All right, thanks for tuning in. That's a wrap on the show. If you want to give your future selves advice, call us to enter our time machine. 1-888-505-6644. That's 1-888-505-6644. record a voicemail with some advice for your future self. And then your future self and I will check in with your past self. It's not confusing at all. It's self-explanatory. Check us out online at www.lastshow.pizza. Subscribe to our podcast. We'll be back tomorrow night. I'm David Cooper. This was The Last Show.